afternoon, CaiLifers, and I hope you're as excited as me as we count down to the release of the Nintendo Switch 2. We're just 56 days away, and I am so excited. I've got mine pre-ordered. I finally managed to snag a pre-order via Amazon yesterday. Have you snagged a pre-order? Are you actually holding off? Maybe you're holding off because of the topic of today's video. Now, a whole bunch of people are up in arms, and they have got their knickers severely in a twist about the launch price of the Nintendo Switch 2, and they might have reason to be a little bit peeved. But I thought I'd do a deep dive into all of Nintendo's hardware releases, handhelds and fully fledged full-fat consoles, all the way back to the original Nintendo Entertainment System, all the way up to the present day in 2025 and the Nintendo Switch 2, to have a look as to whether the price for the Switch 2 is fair, unfair, reasonable, unreasonable, and then see if we can make a judgment call towards the end of the video. Now, before we get stuck into the stats, this is an invitation for you guys to drop that like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Let me know what you're looking forward to with regards to the Nintendo Switch 2. Are you hyped about Mario Kart World? Are you going to pick up Donkey Kong Bonanza? Are you waiting for some more games down the pipeline? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Alright, so our journey takes us all the way back to 1985, which, true story, is actually only a year before I was born. Oh, I'm such an old man. So back in 1985, we had the launch of one of the consoles that really did kickstart the whole era of monstrous console gaming, and that was the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES for short. Now, I've always said NES, but I've looked it up, and apparently it's meant to be pronounced NES. You're supposed to say SNES. Oh, that makes me feel a bit icky. What we're going to do in this list is, starting with the NES, we're going to look to see the launch prices statewide and over here in the UK in the year they were released, and look at the inflation adjusted price in 2025. And we're going to start to try and build a picture of what this Switch 2 launch price is like compared to some previous hardware. The Nintendo Entertainment System was released in 1985 to huge fanfare, and in the States it had a launch price of $199. Now, that is 1985, that's 40 years ago, it's a long time ago. Listen, in 2025 money, that's $590. It's a hell of a lot of money. Just to remind you, the Nintendo Switch 2 is coming out for $449. So already we're looking at a 40-year-old comparison. But in terms of 2025 value and 2025 money, already the Switch 2 is looking great compared to the original Nintendo. In the UK, the Nintendo Entertainment System was released for £75, which sounds like absolutely nothing. That would be £213 by 2025 standards. 4 years later, the handheld that would beget every single handheld we've seen ever since, the Game Boy. I had a Game Boy. This thing ran off AA batteries, and it would chew through batteries like nothing. You'd have to buy so many batteries. We're just polluting the planet like crazy with our battery consumption. The price when that came out in the States was $89, and that translates to $231 by 2025 standards. In the UK, it had a similar price to the NES 4 years prior, released for around £75, which is around £195 by 2025 standards. Just a year later, Nintendo helped to usher in the 16-bit era with the Super Nintendo, or the SNES. I really want to say SNES. Check this out. This retailed for $199, so the same price point as the original NES did in 1985. $199 translates to around $491 in 2025. I'm still going to keep bringing this back to you. 1990, the relative price point, $491. Nintendo Switch 2, $449 in 2025. The UK, we paid £150 for the Super Nintendo back in 1990, and that carried a price point of around £360 to £365 by today's standards. Around £20, £25, £30 short of the base model Nintendo Switch 2, sans any games, in 2025. We then had a 5-year gap until the almighty Virtual Boy came along. And that never even saw the light of day in the UK and Europe because it did so badly in the US and Japanese markets. Nevertheless, that carried a price point of $179 in the US, which translates to around $378 by 2025 standards. But it was 1996. Oh, an iconic year. I was 10 years old. I remember my mum bought me a Nintendo 64 around the time of my birthday, and oh my god, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it for multiple reasons. One, it seemed like a genuinely iconic moment in gaming. Two, I knew even as a 10-year-old that this thing was freaking expensive. But you know, this was the home of Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Mario Kart 64, Superman 64. States, once again, this came out at a price point of $199, which is around $409 in 2025. But in the UK, I remember this being a whopper on the wallet. It retailed for £250. I think it's just the base model, so without any games included. And this is 1996. £250 in 1996 is around £493 by 2025 standards. Drink that in. 493. Now, I will say something at the gate. Now, we have got rather used to Nintendo releasing full-fat consoles that are relatively underpowered. The Nintendo 64 wasn't this. The Nintendo 64 came along and was like, bam! And it was, in some ways, it was OP compared to the PlayStation, but it was severely limited by the fact that all the games ran on cartridges, and the cartridges just couldn't hold as much data as CDs, as discs could at this point. So it had advantages, but it had drawbacks as well. But generally speaking, it was a very powerful piece of hardware. And I think we have to remember that in terms of the price point for the N64, because we've got used to the Wii, even the Switch 1, with some regards to Switch 2, which they're not market leaders in terms of tech specs. But the N64 in 96 was a beast, it really was, but just shy of £500. Keep that in mind, that was 1996, it's just under 30 years ago. Remember, Switch 2, base model, under £400, about £100 cheaper if you're comparing money relatively speaking. Nintendo then went and focused back on their handheld game. They saw the success of the Game Boy, and they sought evolution rather than revolution, and they brought out the Game Boy Color, which is an awesome little handheld. Didn't necessarily break through new barriers, but you know, it was a Game Boy, it was in color, it kind of came in cool variations. It also had a really good price point, so it was released in the States in 1998 for around $80, $79, $80, which is only $156 in 2025, so it was very reasonably priced. In the UK, that translates as £80 back in 1998, £152 if you're buying it in 2025. In 2001, then we saw the Game Boy Advance, still really evolution rather than revolution. We'd have to wait really until the Nintendo DS and 3DS for big gains in the Nintendo handheld space, still reasonably priced. In the States, in 2001, the Game Boy Advance came out for $99. That's around $180 in 2025 terms. In the UK, you're looking at £90 at the time and around £165 relative and adjusted for inflation. 2001 saw the arrival of the lovable purple GameCube. This thing was so cute. It was great. I loved owning this. Super Mario Sunshine made me very, very happy as a boy playing a Nintendo console. The GameCube was released for $199 in the States. Now, that matched the original price of the NES, the SNES, the N64 stateswide. They all came out at $199. Obviously, you have to adjust those values for inflation. But in terms of hitting a certain number, Nintendo was staying fairly consistent at how much that price point was when it comes out. $199 in 2001 is equal to around $365 in 2025. In the UK, it was reasonably priced as well, £130 upon release in the UK in pounds, and that's £239 then in 2025. So it's still a really reasonably priced console. Now, the Nintendo DS comes out in 2004, and it's the first Nintendo handheld that, figure-wise, is the first one to go above $100. It's released for $149 in 2004, which is around $254 in 2025. So a definite increase in price with the Nintendo DS. Same situation with the UK. It was the first Nintendo handheld to get into three figures. So it was released for around £100, which is around £177 in 2025 money. 2006, and we start to see the prices jump. The release of the iconic Nintendo Wii. With the Wiimotes, which essentially beget the Joy-Con, the Wii was an outstanding console, but also probably the first example of Nintendo releasing a piece of hardware that focused more on form factor, its quirky nature, the gyroscopic controls, obviously with the Wiimotes and the nunchucks, and less on technological prowess. It was underpowered and we knew it, but it made no difference to the success of the console, but it did come in at a fairly heftier price point. Wii was released in the States in 2006 for $249. That's $398 by 2025 standards. UK, that translates as £180 on that 2006 release and around £305 by 2025 standards. So still around £100 shy, relatively speaking, of the launch price of the Nintendo Switch 2. But you have to argue that Nintendo Switch 2, relative to its competition, is definitely more powerful. Now, there would be a 5-year gap until Nintendo threw the Nintendo 3DS at us. Now, this seemed like a genuine technological marvel, the ability to sort of play games in 3D without the need to wear 3D glasses, and it had the price point to match. Now, bear in mind that this is 2011, it's 14 years ago, but they came in with a premium price point for the 3DS. Just 5 years prior, the Wii had launched for $249, and in 2011, the same price point, $249, was slapped on the Nintendo 3DS. In 2025, that's around $357. Now in the UK, we got kind of burnt with this price point. There's a little bit of discrepancy. £230 was the launch price of the Nintendo 3DS, and that's around £335 in 2025. So we're starting to get up there. It's a hefty price point. And even when you compare it to some of the following releases, that was a pretty expensive Nintendo bit of hardware. Just 1 year later comes the almighty debacle of the Wii U. Christ on a bike, an absolute disaster of a release. Some people didn't know whether it was an add-on to the original Wii, whether it was just a peripheral that goes with the Wii, whether it was a new console. Nintendo completely botched the release of this. And to add insult to injury, the price was not low. The Wii U came out in 2012 at a price of $349. And in 2025, that's $490. $490. Now, Nintendo really had to get the marketing for that right, and they basically couldn't have done a worse job. In the UK, this kind of stung the wallet as well. It's £300 for the 32GB model. I think it was £250 for the 8GB model. But if you wanted that extra storage space, 32 gigs, £300, over £400. We're talking about £413 in 2025 standards. Now, that was 2012. That was 13 years ago. And again, I'm going to draw your attention to, that's just around £20 short of the 2025 Switch 2 with Mario Kart World price. Brings us on to, of course, Nintendo's two most recent consoles, including the Switch 2, which was first of all the Switch 1, released in 2017, which seems crazy to me. It's 8 years ago. I don't know where that time has gone. It was released for $300 in the US back in 2017. That's around $393 by 2025 standards. In the UK, those figures are £280 at launch, around £367 by 2025 standards. So that brings us now to the upcoming, in 56 days' time, release of the Nintendo Switch 2, which of course is releasing for $449 in the US and for £395 here in the UK. It's around $420 to £430 if you're getting that Mario Kart World bundle. So, is it value for money? Having a look at this list, I found it super interesting doing this data deep dive. Of course, like I said, we've got the Nintendo 64, which, relatively speaking, now that was released back in 1996. And if you were looking at buying that now, adjusted for inflation, £493. So the Switch 2 is cheaper than that. But like I said, when we spoke about the Nintendo 64 was a leader in terms of its tech specs. It was a real monster for the time, and even though the PlayStation more than held its own against the Nintendo 64, Nintendo was still looking at being cutting edge in terms of tech specs. They're not looking to do that anymore. The Wii kind of showed them the way in terms of doing things a bit differently, focusing on their IPs, focusing on quirky hardware, things that maybe weren't so slick, maybe it wasn't so clinical, not a massive focus on being the best looking, the highest FPS, but just cutesy fun games that you'd want to play local multiplayer, online multiplayer for years to come. But I think Nintendo have done something incredibly smart with the launch of the Switch 2, and they've basically made this entire launch centered around Mario Kart World. And I think it's a genius masterstroke, and let me tell you why. We've seen enough now of Mario Kart World to know that this is a huge overhaul. It is a revolution of the Mario Kart idea and ethos, not just an evolution. We've got new tracks, we've got new play styles, we've got the Battle Royale knockout mode, you've got the free roam mode, you've got the driving between courses. It's completely overhauled. But Nintendo also know, and I know, Mario Kart is not a 1-year game. It isn't a 2-year game. You don't buy it in annual iterations. You buy it and then you will play the hell out of it for the entire lifespan of the console it's released on. And Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is a great example of this. I remember buying my Switch in 2017 on release. I got Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and I basically played it non-stop through to 2025. 8 years of Mario Kart. Does it seem kind of crazy to have the idea of like, well, we all know that those of us that have pre-ordered a Switch 2, we're pretty much pre-ordering it just for Mario Kart World, although I will say Donkey Kong Bonanza does look absolutely awesome and basically looks like a new Mario game whilst we wait for a Mario game. But Nintendo know that the strength of their IPs, the strength of their Mario games, the Zelda games, Mario Kart, Smash Bros, Mario Party, all of these games, you will just play them again and again and again. You'll play them again and you'll pour so many hours into them. And so, is that value for money? I think it is. I really think it is. And when you compare it to games like Call of Duty, annual iterations, you have to pay for the base game. You then pay for cosmetics on top, which you don't have to pay for, but lots of people do. And then a year later, that game is sort of considered out of date. Even if you carry on playing it, a new one is released, you kind of want the new game, you want to jump on the new game, your friends are jumping on the new game, so you sort of spend more money for it. By then, you've already spent more than you've spent for Mario Kart. Now, I'm doing a separate video on whether Mario Kart World itself is overpriced. And again, I'm doing a deep dive in terms of stats and comparisons with previous Mario Karts, so join me for that one. But I think the price point for the Switch 2, listen, it's not cheap. It isn't cheap. Would I like it to be cheaper? Yes. Anything that I buy in the world, if someone said, hey, would you like that thing cheaper? I'd say yes, of course. I'd love it to be only £200. I'd love it to be only £300. So is it objectively cheap? No. But obviously, that's all relative to, you know, from person to person and what people can afford. And yes, nearly £400 and over £400 for the bundle isn't objectively cheap. But in terms of the strength of games like Mario Kart, and when you compare it to IPs and exclusive with other consoles, I think Nintendo know what they have. They know what they have. They know that if you don't want to buy it, they can say, well, look, you're not going to play these games anywhere else. You're not going to be able to play these games on any other consoles, you know, at all. Sort of, you know, emulation. They're not going to be able to play it on any other console. So you've got to buy a Switch 2 if you want to be playing Mario Kart World online, for sure. If you want to be playing Donkey Kong Bonanza, if you want to be playing whatever the new flagship Mario game will be, if you want the new Zelda games that'll come out for it, if you want the new Smash Bros, the new Animal Crossing, the strength of Nintendo's IPs, I think, make it worth it, because so many of their games not only demand, but they encourage so many hundreds and thousands of hours, and it's not a grind. Whereas most games, pouring that kind of time into it will feel like a bit of a grind and a bit of a chore. I found that over my nearly 40 years of gaming, that most of the time Nintendo hit the mark in terms of fun with their games. You have fun. It doesn't feel like a chore. It doesn't feel like you're trying to get through it just to complete it, but it's not necessarily a fun experience. Nintendo's all about fun, and I know that for the next 5 to 8 years, whatever the lifespan of the Switch 2, I'm gonna have fun with this console every step of the way. But hey, listen, That's just my opinion, and I am so open to having that opinion changed. So let me know what you think. Have you guys pre-ordered the Switch 2? Is it just a bridge too far in terms of spend? Are you going to wait a year or two? Are you going to wait for the inevitable OLED release? There will be a Switch 2 OLED, we know it. I reckon circa 2027 we'll see an OLED release. Are you waiting for that? Are you waiting for second-hand market? Are you waiting for price drops, maybe closer to the 2025 holiday season? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But listen, the countdown is on and the hype here is real. I am so excited. I'm going to be getting my Switch 2 and Mario Kart World on June the 5th, and we're going to be playing it right here on the channel. So come and join me, because you guys will be invited to play it live on stream with me. Let me know what you want to hear, what you want to see from me with regards to the Switch 2. Let's keep that hype going. But listen, until the next video, take care, much love, and peace out.